Environmental Management Commission's Water Quality Committee meeting. We are beginning with a rather short agenda today, but all very important items. And let me remind members who are here today that we have a sign-up sheet over at the desk that Lois would like us to sign. And you may notice, or may not, that there is new technology in here. It's new and improved technology. And I've been told that the microphones are extremely sensitive. So just keep that in mind if you would like to think about your comments that you want to make. So let's see, anything else about that? Oh, the other thing is to please turn off the audio on your laptop because that may cause feedback, I understand. So, okay. We welcome Commissioners Weiss and Keene and Bailey who are visiting us today. And then for the record, we have all of our members here, I believe. I believe so. And all of our committee members. So we'll begin by reading the North Carolina statute 138A-15 mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of a board, chair shall remind all members of their duties to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. The chair also shall inquire as to whether there is any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at this time. Do any members need to voice any conflicts of interest or reservations about that? I don't see anyone speaking, so the record says there are none. And I will add that I'm going to expand the agenda just slightly. We have Paul Clark, who will be joining us. He is speaking tomorrow to the full commission as a follow-up to something that we asked of the Water Supply Watershed Protection Program model ordinance over a year ago, and he's coming back to give us the revised program for that model ordinance. But since it has been so long since we have heard it, I asked him to come and just give us a few minutes refresher as we go into tomorrow. So he will be arriving later in the meeting. We have one action item, one information item, and the action item is a request for us to consider a resolution from the public-private partnership called for in the 2021 Coastal Habitat Protection Plan Amendment. And speaking on behalf of a breakout group or a stakeholder group that was, I guess, the result of a meeting that was held for the public in New Bern a few months ago. Speaking on behalf of that breakout group is Keith Larrick, Natural Resources Director for the North Carolina Farm Bureau. And Keith will give us all the background on how he came to be here before us today.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. As Commissioner Deerhake said, my name is Keith Larrick. I'm Natural Resources Director at North Carolina Farm Bureau, and I was a member of this stakeholder process that was mentioned. So a little bit of background. As part of the 2021 SHIP amendment, there was a steering committee that is members of the three commissions, EMC, Coastal Resources, and Marine Fisheries. There were some groups, namely the Coastal Federation and Pew Trusts, that had a lot of interest in that process, and those groups were encouraged to kind of go out and convene this stakeholder group to develop some recommendations for the SHIP amendment. So I was one of those stakeholders. There's kind of a group across the board of folks that you would expect from that kind of group. That work group met several times, and those recommendations were put into the CHIP amendment as attachment or Appendix A. One of those main recommendations was this public-private partnership and that, the state should invest kind of in these voluntary actions that can improve water quality kind of without the need for regulatory actions in future years. This public-private partnership was sort of kicked off with this Coastal Water Quality Summit back in October that Commissioner Deerhick mentioned. At that summit, there's always a lot of discussion about how do you move something like this forward. And the idea came out, well, about a resolution that the commissions could then adopt and other groups could get behind. That would kind of indicate kind of broad support for these kind of voluntary programs and increased funding. And so that resolution was worked on, and that's what you have in front of you today. The resolution itself is pretty straightforward, just outlines the need for increased funding across the broad spectrum of, cost share programs and voluntary programs that are out there. Got a couple of examples. Obviously, I'm going to have more of an ag focus being from Farm Bureau. The state has an agriculture cost share program that funds best management practices on ag land. In 2021, that program distributed $4 million across the state to the various soil and water conservation districts. Those districts work with farmers to get practices on the ground. So $4 million is a good chunk of change, but they had $17 million worth of requests. And I mean, that doesn't even include people who have tried to do it in the past and have just given up because they know their project isn't going to get funded. The Division of Soil and Water Conservation also has a community conservation assistance program, and that program works with those soil and water districts to do more stormwater practices. That program did get $1.5 million in 2021, but that was just a one-time fund due to the extra COVID funding that was out there. Their typical allocation is about $200,000. You wouldn't be surprised to learn that doesn't go very far. That obviously the need out there is huge. And then the last example I would give, the Land and Water Fund recently announced $15 million in grants for flood risk reduction projects. And they're looking more at the natural infrastructure projects. You hear about things like constructed wetlands that also have a direct water quality benefit as well, in addition to flood mitigation. That program, $15 million, but again, they had $80 million of requests. So the need out there for this kind of thing is huge. And that's the idea behind this resolution, is to just advocate for increased funding. That's something we do at Farm Bureau. There's other groups out there that do it as well. Like I said, that stakeholder group thought that getting the three commissions to endorse a resolution like that, this would be helpful as well. I believe 2 weeks ago, Marine Fisheries and Coastal Resources did consider this resolution and approve it at their recent meetings. So I think my ask today on behalf of that stakeholder group, we would ask for the Water Quality Committee to endorse this resolution for consideration by the full commission tomorrow. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And I guess I should introduce Charlie Deaton, who's with the Division of Marine Fisheries. He's involved with the CHIP process as well. So I think either of us would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. And we appreciate Mr. Deaton coming. Unfortunately, Jimmy Johnston, who you would normally see here, is not feeling well as Ann Deaton. So we thank Charlie Deaton for coming on their behalf. Are there any questions? You have the resolution before you. I don't know whether you would like Mr. Larrick to go through point by point on it, but anyway, be thinking about that, and I'll call on Commissioner Monis with a question.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. This looks great. Completely agree with everything that you said, and also love to see, in addition to the funding for the actual practices being called out, also the planning and staffing, which is huge. I wanted to ask you, you spoke about a public-private partnership, but this looks like it's mostly focused on public funding. What's the private component? It might not be in here, but more broadly, what y'all were thinking about there.
It's a good question. Thank you. So I think the funding part, at this point, we had looked at public funding. Obviously, there are private entities out there that fund these kind of programs as well. I think that's something that we would sort of get to the next stage is working with those folks. I think the public-private partnership at this point is the public, which is the EMC and DEQ, and then, you know, the private side, kind of the stakeholder groups. That's where it has been so far.
Okay, that sounds great. And as we know, you know, some of the federal programs are going to be expanding over the next several years. So that just seems like another important aspect of this, having the state resources to help with that, and kind of a challenge to also increase the state resources alongside some of the federal resources. So overall, this sounds great, and thank you for bringing it to us.
Yes, Commissioner Davis.
Yes, I am not familiar with these funding programs. So are they open to the entire state?
Yes. So the cost share programs, the agriculture cost share program, obviously there's eligibility requirements for, you know, being a farmer and that sort of thing. But yes, that is a statewide program.
So we're asking for increased funding for the entire statewide program, not just for coastal regions, or are we, how is this integrated?
This resolution would be advocating for the whole state.
Okay.
I mean, most of the state does make it to the coast eventually, whether it's North Carolina or South Carolina. So the general thought is projects throughout the state are generally going to have a coastal benefit eventually.
Okay, so you're saying a project done somewhere else in the state benefits the coastal waters because most of the, our river basins flow to the
Correct.
coast. Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
Commissioner Harris.
I just really, I guess, have a comment, but having spent a career in cost share programs, I'm a big advocate for both of these programs. I've seen it work. I've seen it at higher funding levels. I'd love the voluntary approach. Folks that get into these cost share programs have to provide not a match, but a percentage, let's say a match. Cost share used to be standard. The farmer would have to put in 25, the state 75 on an approved practice based on a set of standards. And so to me, it was very gratifying to see this work go on the ground to hold back nutrients, to hold back sediment. So CCAT was a little bit younger when I was coming along, but again, a great program, saw a lot of benefit to that. So I commend the CHIP group and your committee for pushing this forward, because I believe it's kind of eroded over the years. However, the need is still there, and the need's very great. Just like he said, there's always requests. Working with that local soil and water conservation district, they understand the needs of their local county, and will help focus that funds to where it's needed the most. So, thank you.
I have just one clarifying question, and we talked about landowners and land resources, and as Commissioner Davis mentioned, it's statewide, but also I'm wanting to get clarity on the potential business sectors. So they're the farming enterprises, but that also will include animal operations. Is that correct?
Yes, it does. So animal operations are eligible for the cost share programs. I think, one thing you see with some of the funding issues is the money doesn't go very far. Especially, if you look at, like closing out an inactive lagoon. That is an eligible practice under the cost share program, but, your starting price for that is probably about $100,000. If you've gone out of business, you probably don't have that kind of money laying around. So funding has been an issue over time for sure, but absolutely animal operations are eligible.
And of course, these funds, it's important to get them out on the land and acting, but there's also another component of those programs that I think is very important, and that is performance assessment, monitoring and verification of accurately and properly installing and operating the BMPs. So I just wanted to raise that as another component that I think is extremely important. And it helps provide the information needed to perhaps continue to improve the programs and increase funding for them over time. And assuring that, as Commissioner Harris has mentioned before, that once that first grant runs out, that these farmers have the incentive to keep using that BMP practice and not let it go idle. So, thank you. Commissioner Bailey, as a member of the steering committee, is there anything you would like to say at this point? It is scheduled to come before the full commission tomorrow.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity, but Mr. Lyric did a great presentation, and I liked hearing more about how it affects the farmers in the state too, and what a help that is. I think that's something I hadn't really realized as being on the steering committee. So thank you for your presentation. Will you be here tomorrow? Or?
I will be, yes.
Thank you.
Council Reynolds.
Yeah, so just a little background for you all. I also represent the Soil and Water Conservation Commission, which is where I got to know Commissioner Harris for many years. And well, I knew Mr. Lair before that when he was part of the old DWQ, but still remain engaged with him through my representation. And I've also been back working with the Marine Fisheries Commission on a limited basis here over the last few months, which is a commission I keep threatening to get Commissioner Solomon appointed to because it's so onerous at times.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. You're the right man for the job. But this resolution was considered by the MFC at its meeting week before last, and they are overwhelmingly in support of it. And of course, having seen what those cost share programs do, and I know many of you are also familiar with it, Commissioner Deerhake and Commissioner Monis as well. I think it's an excellent program and very much worthy of this commission's support if you so choose. So, thank you.
Thank you, Council Reynolds. So we have the proposed resolution for consideration before us, and I'd be glad to accept a motion. Commissioner Harris.
With honor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the resolution to move forward to the EMC.
Thank you. Second by Commissioner
I'll second.
Monis. Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Oh, okay. Opposed? The ayes carry. It is
Thank you.
still okay to just have a voice vote at this point, right? Okay. Thank you, Keith Lyric. We appreciate that. And I realized I skipped over our meeting minutes, so we're going to back up one note here, and we're going to consider our meeting minutes. You have them before you. I realized that one of my marginal track changes that I sent back to the division, I accidentally omitted. Please remember that Vice Chair Harris was at that last meeting. And so with that one amendment, are there any other revisions to the meeting minutes? I'll accept a motion. Motion to approve the minutes? Anyone? So moved. Thank you, Commissioner Davis. Second by Commissioner Harris. Any comments or questions or discussion about the meeting minutes as amended? If there are none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes as amended with Commissioner Harris's name approved. Okay, carries. Our information item is an update on the stormwater nitrogen and phosphorus tool, commonly known as SNAP. It's version 4.2, and we have from the division Trish Starconti, who will give us some information about that.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Trish Starconti, DWR Non-Point Source Planning, and I'm going to tell you about our upcoming revised stormwater nitrogen and phosphorus tool. Okay, so first of all, what exactly is it? Some of you are familiar with this tool. It's an Excel-based spreadsheet that calculates average annual runoff and the nitrogen and phosphorus export that is coming from a development site. It models first the nutrient reduction, or it also models the nutrient reductions that you have from an optional stormwater control measure. And through the rest of this presentation, I'll call them SCMs. It's based on earlier North Carolina State University tools and methods produced by their bio and ag engineering program. Presently, the current version, SNAP 4.1, and previous tools have all been used for compliance with state stormwater nutrient management strategies. And the current version, well, 4.1, 4.2, are designed now for usability across the state in all sorts of purposes in terms of compliance as well as other uses.
Just a
Yeah.
point of clarification. The first bullet calculates annual runoff nitrogen phosphorus from a development site. Is that a site currently under development, or is that a site that has been developed?
It's a site that is developed or you're proposing to develop, or you want to model what it's going to be when it's done. So theoretically, you could model a forest. That is one of the land covers, or you could model landscaped grass area. Those are some of the land covers that you can have, but this does not cover agriculture. It doesn't cover things like on-site wastewater. It's a very, very simple model, and it's really just oriented towards urban land uses. Okay, so how it works. So it's site scale, which means it's at the development site scale. It's not the larger sort of watershed models that some of you may be familiar with. It looks at average annual runoff volume, and it's calculated with the simple method and uses multiple land cover types and a very simple set of them. It's rooftop, roadway, parking, and then lawn and forest. So it's a really, really simple set of land cover types. First, it calculates average annual runoff volume for every different kind of land cover, and each land cover has a specific nutrient concentration associated with it depending on the type of land cover. All of this is aggregated into an annual load of nitrogen and phosphorus that would leave the site in pounds per year. And no SAM is required in order to model this. As I said, you could model just a lawn, or you can model just a forest, but the assumption is this is in an urban area and that you'll have urban types of land covers. Then if you do have an SCM, you have nutrient treatment, the volume that is sent to that SCM is partitioned to 3 different hydrologic fates. So we model evapotranspiration and infiltration, which is just a straight up percent reduction. We estimate a percent average annual overflow that just carries that influent concentration through, and then there's an effluent that goes through the SCM, and each SCM has a specific nutrient concentration on average that's associated with the outflow from that type of SCM. Here is a diagram describing that. So the inflow is all of the accumulated volume from all the different lane covers that are sent to this SEM. You don't have to send all of your water to the SEM or all of your runoff, but that's the simplest model you could do. Then and then all of that volume is separated into 3 different fates, as it's called. And one of them is evapotranspiration and exfiltration, which we assume just leaves the system. It either evaporates or it goes into the groundwater, it's gone, and it brings nutrients with it. Okay, some general tool assumptions on how this works. I'll point out that the simple method is really simple, devised by Tom Schuler of Center for Watershed Protection, I believe is where he was at the time. It's a very simple algebraic equation based on average annual rainfall. We assume that nitrogen and phosphorus export increases linearly with runoff volume. We assume that when we're doing this model, we're looking at the average annual behavior. So it's, any one individual storm is going to behave differently, but we're looking at the whole thing and over generally multiple years. We assume that SCMs, the effluent coming out of them, that the concentration clusters around a set value. This is kind of a very specific thing to the SNAP tool and to its predecessors, this idea that every SCM has kind of a central tendency for its effluent. We assume that any infiltrated phosphorus is just immobilized in the soil or used by organisms. And any infiltrated nitrogen, we assume, goes through shallow interflow, and that we assume that it denitrifies prior to reaching any water body. And we also assume with this tool that anything is designed and maintained to state requirements. So some important tool limitations, and this is based on the simple method. The drainage area maximum that you should ever model is 1 square mile, and really that's rather gigantic for any particular development site. It can't estimate any amount of error variability. It doesn't model agricultural land uses or on-site wastewater, doesn't model subsurface or in-stream transport transformation. It doesn't model buildup and wash off of pollutants. It doesn't model connected and disconnected impervious surfaces differently, except as one particular specialty SCM that does. And then it doesn't model the relative placement of impervious surfaces and permeable surfaces on the flow path, like other models might do. And then lastly, custom SCMs, if you want to use them, we have to have the same kind of information about the behavior that we do for the SCMs that come standard with this tool, such as the hydrologic partitioning and the effluent concentration. So these are the things that you can do with the tool. So I mentioned that it is used for nutrient management strategy compliance, but within that, you can model custom stormwater types, stormwater control measure types, especially if it's something new, if it's an innovative SCM, as long as you have the information to be able to model it within this, you can do that. You can also use custom SCM designs from NC State's alternative design tools. So they have a set of design tools for if you want to design bioretention or permeable pavement differently from what is called for in the minimum design criteria. This is commonly used if you want to either oversize or change the media or change the way it works. Then you can model, is it behaving differently using these NC State tools. And you can use the output from those to put into the SNAP tool. You can use custom lane cover types. You can model multiple SCM sizes, and this is relative to the standard regulatory design. So as I said, you can oversize or undersize relative to the water quality volume. And then you can use multiple combinations of SCMs in series and in parallel. So I mentioned the under and oversizing, and we worked with NC State using 20 years of rainfall data at RDU airport in order to model how different groups of SEMs behave. And so this one, if I recall correctly, is for the average 60-hour retention time that we model for wet ponds and other things that behave like wet ponds. And so this is how you would use, if you want to oversize your SEM, then you determine that it holds more and more of the average annual runoff and less leaves the system as overflow. So these are the type of nutrient stormwater control measures that we have in the tool. You may be familiar with your primary SEMs. Those are ones that are used to meet stormwater requirements. Generally, that's what's usually called for as a primary SEM. And then there are other types of SEMs, secondary and alternative designs, that you can also model their nutrient reduction. So one of the primary ways to use the tool is for regulatory compliance, as I said, for nutrient management strategies. But within that, you'd be using it maybe in different ways. If you are a project designer early in the design, since it's extremely easy to tweak and you get results immediately, you can change around your land cover ratios, you can change your SCMs and how you arrange your SCMs relative to each other, if they're in parallel or series. And then once you've settled on something, then you use that to determine for what you're proposing for a development site. This is what you're modeling that should be the behavior of the site after your construction is completed. And so for your nutrient management strategy, stormwater requirements, that's part of your stormwater management plan that has to be approved by the local government. Then, as I note, there's the local government. They would be documenting site load reductions for rule compliance, annual reporting. Some of them are using it even though they're not part of a nutrient management strategy right now. They still want to be tracking what's happening in their jurisdictions. We've been working closely with some of the local governments that have fairly complicated development and redevelopment scenarios happening in downtowns and other high-density areas where they can't avoid handling existing built-upon area or runoff from offsite. And so they can model what is required of them for their site, which excludes existing built-upon area, and then what treatment of offsite runoff might provide in terms of what you might call an on-site offset credit, so to speak, or overtreatment. And then last, from a regulatory compliance standpoint, you have an easy data collection platform so that you can get all of this information, and that's part of your annual reporting that local governments would be doing. We've also set up this tool so that it's easy to use for non-regulatory uses. Existing development, stormwater retrofits. Now, some of the rules do have a requirement for existing development stormwater retrofit, but others don't. And across the rest of the state, this is just something that is done to address either other known water quality problems or as part of a grant project. We've worked with many local governments and with councils of government to scope out projects for urban stormwater planning, to look at the scenarios for undersizing and oversizing of SCMs. When you're looking at existing development, you often don't get to choose what space you've got for your SCM, so you have to work with what you can. And you can also model land cover conversions, like if you're removing impervious surface or you're exchanging out lawn for forest. You can estimate and document reductions for your projects. So a lot of the grant programs that we work with, such as CCAP, 319, 205J, the North Carolina Water Resource Development Grant, Land and Water Fund, others, they all want to have you estimate any kind of nutrient or pollutant reduction. And in this case, it would be nitrogen and phosphorus reduction. And so this is made to very simply help them walk through doing that. We've had a lot of inquiries about the creation of SEM-based nutrient banks. And I put this under non-regulatory because it's not required that it be done. But we're now developing how's a process for setting up SEM-based nutrient banks, and they would do their calculation using the SNAP tool. And then there's a lot of stormwater and watershed restoration research. I hear from people at universities probably once a semester on how do they do a model for this, or is this an appropriate model for what they're doing. So I want to back up a little bit, since the whole reason that we are revising this is because the NUSE and the TAR-Pamlico stormwater rules revised in April of 2020. And it requires local programs to change to use a currently approved nutrient calculator. So the current SNAP 4.1 that's about to be superseded needed adjustments to be easy to use in the NUSE and the TAR-Pamlico. It was still a little confusing, and we've gotten a lot of feedback from our users over the past 4 years of how they'd like it to work differently. And as some of you may be familiar, we have the rules split into, local programs are split into 2 cohorts with different schedules. So we have one cohort of local governments that are going to be implementing their new local program effective May of this year, so just a few months from now. So they need a new tool. Then we have the rest of that same cohort that's going to be following them pretty shortly. And the second cohort is a group of newly added local governments that we expect to start using the tool no later than May of 2024. And Falls Lake local governments and those using the tool in Jordan Lake watershed will also need to switch over to change to the new tool. And as far as we know, only UNC Chapel Hill is the only entity in Jordan Lake that is keeping track, as far as we know. And those local programs have 6 months from the tool release in order to switch. And that's what happened the last time when we switched from the Jordan Falls tool to the first SNAP tool. They had 6 months. So I want to talk about how we went through the process of updating this, how we decided what we needed to do, how to change it. We have already been working with Demler Stormwater Permitting Unit and NC State's Bio and Ag Engineering and put together a broader stakeholder work group, including members of local government as well as professional designers. And we revised and clarified what we call the SCM credit document, which is where we document how we've decided to credit all of these different SCM types, how they behave, the data that all of this was based on, and how the models work for each of them. And so we got a whole bunch of new SCM data that we've been processing. We updated SCM performance ratings, and we've presented this to the Nutrient Scientific Advisory Board. So that being kind of the guts of what drives evaluating SCM performance with the SNAP tool, then the rest of the tool and how it works, we've been getting continuous input from users on tool functions and performance from the moment that we released it late 2018 to now, through user requests for assistance or comments from users about what they'd like to work differently. We had direct outreach in 2021 with local governments with a test version where I had taken all of that information and requested they try it out and tell me if that works for them. And then we just, with all of that feedback, we presented a very close to done SNAP tool to the Nutrient Scientific Advisory Board just a few months ago. We had a formal, well, informal 30-day plus comment period in December and January. And then we've still had a few requests for user input and input from NC State to do some final tweaks. And we expect that it's going to be approved and put up on the website. Have a nice formal announcement email going out in just a couple days. So once it's approved by the DWR director, it goes up on the website. As I said, we have a formal release memorandum and an email. We'll be doing announcement emails through various listservs that we have access to, as well as the lists of participants that we've had from work groups, from implementation of new Centar-PAM rules and so forth. We will have specific instructions for those new Centar-PAM Cohort 1 local governments that are due to implement starting in May. And similarly for Falls Lake local governments and Jordan Lake state and federal that will be implementing. So they'll have very specific instructions so they know what's expected of them and what their next steps are. We've already had some training and outreach on this tool. I'll be giving a presentation to Water Resources Research Institute annual conference in a couple of weeks. And then shortly after that, we've put together virtual training sessions. Specifically, one of them is very specifically for local governments that will be implementing nutrient management strategies, and very specifically for their plan reviewers, so that they understand all the different parts of the tool that is set to help them evaluate for data entry errors and to look for the parts of the results that they need to do their reporting. And then we also have just a very simple 1 hour introduction to the tool for anybody. Both of these will be recorded and they'll be put online so that you can look them again. And then we're also going to do a specialty workshop with NC State's Bio and Ag Engineering, which we've done before, on the SNAP tool and the associated NC State tools that work with those. Just briefly, SNAP user resources. We have a user manual and a user listserv. As I said, we'll have recorded virtual training courses, and people can always contact me if they have questions. So I wanted to review real quick the kinds of changes that we have had from the previous version. One of the things that we discovered from input was that people weren't sure how to use it. They're not looking at the user's manual. Most people don't do that with a tool. We wanted to put the most simple, straightforward instructions up front, first sheet, so that you could understand what do you need to do depending on what is your objective for using the tool. So the first split we do is, are you using this for meeting nutrient management strategy, stormwater for new development, or are you using this for some other reason? We've updated it for the revised new Centar-PAM local stormwater rules. We've simplified and reorganized the data entry to make it easier for those who have a non-regulatory use. You can just go straight to the results. There's hardly anything that you have to put in order to use it easily. It calculates, this is a very direct request from some of the local governments, was to be able to track nutrient export from offsite or non-regulated areas if they couldn't separate runoff from their site. This happens in downtown environments when there's redevelopment, but there may be some, but they'd only consider it new development because there is some expansion going on, but they're just not able to separate offsite runoff. It incorporates a couple of additional SCMs and updated performance for all of those SCMs. For the local governments, it summarizes in one place all of the project information related to determining compliance for the site. Like what information is needed even to determine what aspect of the rules apply to your site, what your targets are, whether your site meets the thresholds for applicability. All of that is on one sheet and allows the local government to easily track all of this, and also to look for any kind of errors with data entry. We have encountered problems with macros, and previous versions of this tool had macros that did fancy things. And they may have been appreciated by local governments, but they were also a source of considerable security problems and bad behavior and bugs, so we took them out. And then we have a data dictionary to enable local governments, they wanted to be able to import their data into databases. So they wanted things to be a little bit more structured, so they knew how to pull it from the tool and into their databases. I wanted to review the very recent public comment input in response because you've heard from some commenters that had concerns about the tool. Most of the comments that we have received were about the appearance and legibility, the ease of use, the clarity, the terminology, automating functions, supporting materials. Very little of it was related to the deep underlying functioning of the tool and how it behaved. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but those are the kinds of issues that we had and addressed in our revision and in the user's manual to make sure they know what to do. So right now I'm going to walk you through the tool. Let's see. Okay, this is what you see on the first page. When you open up the tool, as I noted, it asks, how are you using Snap? All of these things that are blue underlines that look like links for URLs online are in fact links for URLs online. It will take you to the Falls Lake rules or to CCAP project information or bio and ag engineering at NC State. All of these different things link to somewhere on the internet to give you more resources. So it separates it from new development for regulatory compliance from either no new development or non-regulatory. And your non-regulatory is understandably simpler than what you have to do for regulatory compliance. But it walks you through, it tells you the kinds of questions you need to ask of your local government to help you determine, do the rules apply to you? What are your objectives for meeting the rules? What kind of information do you need to be pulling together in order to fill out all the parts of the tool that you need to? Let's see. And basically then it helps you determine, you go through this and determine, am I meeting the targets that I would need to for my development site? And if you're not, then it gives you the different options for what you might want to try. And that's just the splash page or the how-to. This sheet coming up. So this one is strictly project information, which is related to implementation of nutrient management strategies. All of the things on here, except for maybe those that are in pale gray, are directly related to determining applicability of one of the 4 nutrient management strategy rule sets. And so all of this information is needed for one or all of them. And so we ask people to put all that information in. It helps local governments for determining applicability. This covers your land cover characteristics. It's almost exactly the same as it was in the previous version, except that we also include calculation for offsite or existing UA so that you can track if that's what you're handling runoff from either of those, then you can know how much, if you are, we instruct people, if they're not using it and if they're not directing runoff from these into an SEM, just don't include it. You only include that stuff if for some reason you've decided you need to treat that runoff in an SCM. But there are a lot of data quality checks on this sheet to help you out. Let's see. Here we have, let's see if it'll fly. Definitions of the land cover types, in case you're not sure about what is a roadway or what is a roof. Your SEM characteristics sheet coming up is very similar to what was before. Here's more flyovers that'll pop up if you're over top of them. This one ordinarily would have some or previously would have some very fancy behavior based on a whole lot of buttons and macros. So we took all of that out because it was buggy and causing a lot of problems. So this sheet tries to help you work through One may be just a simple single SEM installation, or you may have a complex combination of SEMs and series and parallel, and it helps guide you through that process. You have a whole area where it will do some error checking for you to make sure it's looking for different kinds of error conditions, such as missing data or conflicting data, or especially in the case of working with multiple SCMs, if you have irrational things like circular routing. You can't have one SCM going to another and back to the first. And your land covers, same as your other set. So this is the sheet where all the results are put. At the top here, it is where it tells you whether there are any errors detected in data entry, whether it's got any advisories for you. It will look to see if you seem to have a net increase in BUA, since that is a trigger for determining something is considered new development. If you don't have a net increase in BUA, then it's not new development, and the rules don't apply. And down here is where all the results are, and we've broken it out in many, many different ways because some people want to see pounds per year or pounds per acre per year, or they want to see the change from pre-development to post-development. So we've broken it out in a whole different ways. You have your project area, which is your what you have the regulatory compliance is based on. And then there's a total area if you're also including offsite. And then we have, well, a basic nutrient offset credit sheet reporting form for those local governments that don't have one of their own. It automatically fills in stuff from other sheets and then allows you to add additional if you have a local buy down requirement. And we have a detailed, this is where we put all of data so that databases can be connected to this sheet and pick up data. You can export out to a database and we'll have full instructions because that's a fairly complicated thing to do, but our users would like to do it. All right. Are there any questions?
Any questions from members? Thank you for that detailed explanation. Director Rogers, would you like to add anything?
This specific presentation? Got lots I'd like to add.
No, to this, because I know that there has been a lot of discussion.
Yeah, there's been a
in the
lot of
past year.
discussion, and we're still in the process of gathering the plans that are outstanding. We've heard back from all the groups, with the exception, I think, of Oxford and Newburgh. We're in the process of contacting them, and our hope is to bring it back to y'all to the full board in May. It's our anticipated timeframe.
Thank you. I know some of our members have a lot of expertise in this field. Any observations about this? None for the record. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Darkani. I know that was a lot of work. Thank you. And we appreciate your being the voice for the part of the program and for speaking out to the local governments and being their point of contact and the outreach. And we hope the outreach goes successfully in the coming months. Okay. There's one thing we do not have in our meeting minutes. We normally have a section that just lists what's going on the next day that might be water quality involved in, with the full EMC meeting. But I will say that we are hearing from Mr. Paul Clark tomorrow, and I've asked him if he would just come give us a brief review of what he's going to be saying tomorrow to help us start thinking about it as we go into tomorrow's meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Deerhake. It has been a little bit of time, so I came before, actually, I didn't have a bicycle accident, but the draft revised, updated water supply watershed protection ordinance was presented to the Water Quality Committee of EMC in July of 2021, and it was approved. And then I came before the full EMC in September of that same year, September of 2021, and had some good questions and good comments. And the request was made that I go back and seek particularly more input from those who are competent and experts, more knowledgeable about local ordinance development. And so that's what I did. I got some comments from a couple of folks at UNC School of Government. They made their comments. I incorporated the comments. So I'll be presenting tomorrow, and I should back up a step too, because I know people change and people may not be as aware. Prior to me talking about the ordinance revision that's going to come before you all, I'll give some background just on the water supply watershed protection program, just to give you a general idea of that program. And then at the end of that, you're be happy to answer questions, and then you'll vote as to whether to approve that draft model ordinance. And one thing, again, I don't want to say too much because I'll be presenting tomorrow, but the last time the ordinance was revised was in 1995. And so there had been some statute changes, there's been some rule updates. So it's definitely timely that the ordinance be revised.
So you said 2021 was when?
Right, it was in this July when I came before the committee, and then it was in September when I came before the full EMC.
Thank you. It has been a little while,
It
and
has,
we
yeah.
appreciate the time you've invested in the interim to continue to improve it. And we look forward to hearing that tomorrow. Any quick questions for Mr. Clark? Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. The other two water quality items that we have tomorrow, you'll also hear the resolution again for the CHIP program and the cost share funding requests. So we'll have that tomorrow. And then the third item coming out of this committee would be the Nello Tier Quarry reclassification for water use. And we'll have a hearing officer's report, and I believe Mr. Carter was a hearing officer on that. Is that right, Ms. Countess? Yeah, so we will hear that hearing officer's report on that reclassification request tomorrow. Any discussion about any other topics that the committee wishes to think about? No? Okay. It's a rather simple agenda today. We thank everyone for attending. And if there are none, Director Rogers, any other remarks that you might like to
Just,
make?
appreciate your effort on the resolution. I think it's always a great opportunity to bring voluntary work in with the regulatory side that we're on. In my past work, I've had the opportunity to work with Ag Cost Share. It's a fantastic program. And I think it will bring us together a little bit more and help us implement these CHIP rules and plan that we're trying to implement. So well done, bravo.
Thank you. Well, if there's no additional business, then our next meeting will be in May. So Water Quality Committee meeting is adjourned. Thank you.